Hi, everyone. So it's my great pleasure today to present some results regarding how we can move towards an interpersonalized computational psychiatry. My name is Guillaume Dumas. I'm a research associate professor at the University of Montreal and appointed professor at Mila, Quebec AI Institute. I'm working on conditions, mental health conditions such as autism. I prefer the term condition than disorder for inclusivity purpose. And typically in the case of autism, those conditions unfold across different scales. So we have a constellation of symptoms that are very complex at the behavioral level. And we are now expanding our understanding of the molecular scale through genetics and large cohorts. But beyond those scales, the important thing with psychiatry is that our system involves different actors, ranging from the patient themselves to researcher, MDs and clinicians, nonprofit association with the families and policymakers. And all those actors interact between each other with different domain and different level of interest in different things. So while the patient has an experience of their condition, well, clinicians are more interested in the etiology, so the cause of the condition, or the nosology and what kind of disease or disorder or condition it is. And then from a researcher perspective, it's also understanding all the relationship between this subjective experience, the brain-body coordination, and the rest of the actors. And on top, there are like different theories. So I like a lot this parable where with the elephant and the blind man, where actually the elephant is human cognition, and there are different theories trying to make sense of it. And I strongly believe in plurality of theoretical perspective and how those theory catch just a piece of the puzzle. And those pieces come from different disciplines. So if we look at the map of all the fields in science, and we look at where the field interested in mental health and cognitions are, it's widespread. I mean, we have people coming from economics, we have people from neurology, from animal behavior, biotechnology, and even applied physics. So all those scales are scattered also because they come from, the observation come from different domains. And those different scales also have been separated in a way that does not mimic what happened in nature. And so, for instance, I'm a big fan of Claude Bernard, the father of physiology, where, like he was saying, systems are in the minds of humans, and nature doesn't care about those scales. They are interacting between each other. And so, to glue back what we have separated, well, we have to take into account all those scales simultaneously. And in psychiatry, one scale that is super important is the social scale. So if we take the Cambridge model from Berlioz, actually the symptoms from psychiatric conditions are the relationship between biological signals and a dialogical negotiation with the environment at cultural and social level. And for like more than 10 years, I've been trying to study what some people call the dark matter of neuroscience, which is like how two people are engaged in dynamical interaction and what is the biological basis of this interactive social cognition. And associated with this question of the social scale, there is a paradox with two different communities studying either the more like representational part of social cognition and another more like the interactive part of the problem. And the problem, this paradox, come to me from a separation of scales, because you need a system one type of interaction to shape your representation of others, but the representation of others also shape and help the interaction with them. And so we are in this kind of chicken egg issue that to me is purely created by this separation of scale. And to tackle that, I've been approaching that with experimental setup like hyperscanning EEG, so multi-brain recordings, computational models, and human-machine interaction. And to explain briefly the hyperscanning part, it It is a technology that allows to record multiple brains simultaneously during social interaction, which answer another paradox of social neuroscience, which is that we try to make sense of the social brain from the perspective of a lone individual with passive stimuli for a long time. And with hyperscanning, we can record those people back into a interactive setting. And what we show is using those technology, the social context and the role that we are taking modulate the brain dynamics. So beyond even the fact that social interaction is different from social perception, and thus questioning that social neuroscience was maybe narrow on its perspective on social brain, there is a whole world out there where when we are interacting, the context in which the social interaction unfolds and the role we are taking also change the way the brain reacts. But more interestingly, we are also able, using this hyperscanning recording, to show that there were synchronization of brain activity up to the millisecond timescale between the people when they were actively engaged in these interactions. So this has repercussion on social neuroscience, but also on psychiatry. And typically, when I say that the social dimension have been key for certain people, but neglected for other, in this piece, I argue how those interbrain approach and multi-brain neuroscience can help build up interpersonal psychiatry. And with colleagues, we even pushed later to interpersonalized psychiatry to integrate the precision part and personalized part of psychiatry. So to achieve that, computational methods are very interesting because they can naturally draw connection between those levels that I mentioned earlier. So beyond the levels of just molecular to neuronal, we can go up to the point of the social. So computational psychiatry is just not throwing computational models to psychiatric problems. There are different cultures that already approach that. There are some people dichotomize that in two sort of culture. There's a lot of papers and books already out there, even if it's a young field. But if we want to roughly see those two cultures, there is like a theory driven, which try to understand psychiatric condition by actively modeling hypotheses that we have about the mechanisms at play, and a more data-driven that takes the data and try to extract a signature or biomarker. We even, with colleagues, push to a third culture, which is more like digital psychiatry, and which is at the front line with the real life. Basically, we saw that during the pandemic. Wonderful assets for development of mental health. And typically on top of the machine learning, more like bottom up, and the generative modeling top down computational psychiatry, there is this frontline computational psychiatry with digital tools and health records management, etc. One of the problems is that at the sociological computational psychiatry have mostly focused on behavior and decision-making mostly, and reinforcement learning. There's a whole world out there with what some ancient people called on the maps, the Ixun dracones, where there be dragon, which is like the genetic, molecular, and cellular aspects that are associated with sensory motor systems and social processes. And that's where, like, I think we should also explore to avoid to have a too narrow perspective on what psychiatric conditions are. So how do we get there, and how computational modeling and AI typically can help? Well, we have a lot of data on the left, and basically a lot of clinicians and actors want to have a guidance in their decision-making regarding mental health. Some people would very easily put a sticker AI on top of the black box to go from the left part to the right part. This is like an easy move from a marketing point of view, but we need to have an open and interpretable systems. So that doesn't need necessarily to have like super complicated statistical models. Actually, a lot of things that have been said, sold as AI are more like classical logistic regression, and they are doing great job actually. But my point is that beyond the classic statistical model that can help disentangle different types of marker, like here, where we can measure the distance from the green axis A, and if we take like this toy example and average for each dimension, we will not able to separate the control in blue and the patient in red. But if we parameterize statistically every individuals by the distance from the axis A, we have a full separation. And so a smart statistical model can allow to have, for instance, a diagnostic biomarker. But we can go beyond just classical statistical model. There are base models that allow already to integrate priors on from the existing literature, not especially. We can inject biological priors. So for instance, here from omics database, we can insert protein-protein interaction to boost the robustness of genes statistics at the genome level. We can inject also prior about evolution. So recently we have all the work on archaic DNA that allow to shine light on the recent evolution of human brain. And we can use that to also have an heuristic of which brain region is involved in what case for different conditions. And beyond the priors at the data level, we can also have priors about the mechanism themselves. So like in that case, the model become a generative model, to not misunderstood as generative AI. Here we're talking about a computational model that is able to regenerate data that looks like the data that we measure, but where we have interpretability and a full view on the process that generate the data. So it's more like interpretable generative model. This thing can be done within brain, but also in the case of my lab, we are working on generative model of social interaction, where we simulate brains of people during social interaction and show, for instance, that it can explain some alteration of social cognition, like in the context of autism, without trying to involve a specific brain area or a specific gene. And the last step would be like to have an interactive model. So like the model is not just like something that you run on a computer. You can have a human interacting with the model itself, and the model can be simultaneously something for testing our theories, but also to evaluate the human. So I will try to show you an example where we connect the three culture, and I think that's one of the big challenge to achieve this interpersonalized psychiatry on the long term. So if we take the three types of computational psychiatry that we lay out with my colleagues, we have the generative models side, which is more like this dynamical system that is interactive with the human. We have the machine learning part, where we can collect data with the interaction of this model and try to extract patterns. And we have the digital tools in the shape of typically HoloLens helmets that can be used to deep phenotype in situ at the clinical level. So we started with video games in 2D, and we moved to these mixed reality helmets to have a better integration in the life setting of clinicians and families. And here, the idea is to not only make measurements of what's going on through the video game, but potentially move towards like rehabilitation and educative video game that reenact the move from basic sensory motor skills of kids to more like socio-cognitive skills. So in that case, like you can see the video here, that's first-person perspective on one of the early prototype of the game, and people can explore. There's like avatars and props, and while the user is interacting and popping balloons like you see here, we are collecting a lot of data on their position, reaction time, etc. And just with this kind of interaction, we can derive different metrics about motor skills, about the movement, about intention attribution. Is the participants, the player, able to associate the cooperativeness or competitiveness of the partners that are in the game. And ultimately, we show with a simple version of these games that we are able to do interactive psychometrics, and just with behavior are able to go beyond 80% accuracy on diagnosis of autism. So with the video game in mixed reality, we are pursuing this effort and trying to even beat this 80% by combining not only the movement, but also physiological recordings. And ultimately, the second challenge is to go beyond case versus control by integrating stratification and normative modeling. So instead of seeing patient as a different category, to maybe identify subgroup of patient to have more targeted rehabilitation strategy, or to see more as a continuum and have a more dimensional approach to their care. So that's like the continuous, and that's the stratification. So based on typically deep learning models, we can extract profiles in lower latent space based on the video games data, and then use those profiles to plot developmental trajectories across controls, patients of different kinds. And we can see here, for instance, one example that is more illustrative with controls are in blue and patients are in red, that in some case scenario, we are trying to dichotomize patient and control, while in fact they are part more like of the same continuum. And we can see here like the patient in orange and green that are more like associated with executive function. And so that help to tackle more like subcategories of patients to understand what's going on. Then, based on those heterogeneous profile, we can also use other approaches such as like clustering to regroup those individuals in homogeneous subclusters and try to adapt those clusters to different intervention or different trajectories of development. And the third challenge is to integrate in this overall approach the social dimension. So I mentioned the hyperscanning, integrative neuroscience, where we can extract biomarker at the interbrain level. I mentioned how we can use biological prior, for instance, to inject evolution or protein-protein interaction in computational biology. But I believe that we need to make a coordination between those two aspects, the integrative neuroscience and the computational biology, if we want to achieve precision psychiatry and interpersonal psychiatry. And so this resonates a lot with the research domain criteria of NIMH, but in the research domain criteria, the dimension of the social dimension is still missing. So we need to really take it seriously and integrate it in our approach to mental health, more than just taking the socio-pedagogic dimension and let it to a specialist outside the field of psychiatry, but really integrating from the get-go. So one example where computational psychiatry can even go beyond individuals and integrate fully this social dimension. During the pandemic, since we couldn't run experiment, we ran this computational analysis of popular and scientific discourse about autism by comparing Twitter, now X, and PubMed, and looking at the different discourse about autism and showing quantitatively that the topics of interest for the stakeholder, the patient, the family, and the people who are primarily concerned with autism are about awareness, acceptance, skills, and basically integration in society, while most of the research about autism is focused on neuroscience, neurogenetic, and language. And so that shows that we can use also computational approach beyond just the individual brain to maybe inform better policymaker and way of aligning research on mental health with the stakeholder. Another example with colleagues in Cambridge and Stanford was to look at the social determinant of mental health. And in this paper in Lancet Child Adolescent Health, we looked at the world population of UK for kids, all the kids in UK, and watched at the incidence of autism geographically, and saw that the incidence of autism vary across sex, age, ethnicity, and geographical location, pointing out that the social determinants of mental health are also massively important and that they are on top actionable from a policy-making point of view. So like here, again, it's kind of also supporting claims that have been made maybe a long time ago by social science, but bringing a more quantitative support to these claims. So a fourth challenge is to maybe go beyond. I mentioned the bottom-up and top-down with hypothesis or machine learning extracting marker from data, is to go beyond the data-driven versus hypothesis-driven computational psychiatry. So in this paper, for instance, with the talented Herman Abrevaya, in collaboration with IBM and MIT and UBA in Argentina, we combined deep learning approach with computational models of brain activity to show that injecting prior, so that's the generative model that I was mentioning earlier, injecting shapes of what we expect for brain activity in the form of differential equation and fitting the parameters of those differential equation using deep learning is better than either using a full black box deep learning method or a full computational model fit. So we can combine this data-driven machine learning approach with a more hypothesis-driven computational models from computational neuroscience. And here, like what we have shown is like we can take human fMRI or rodent calcium imaging or even zebrafish, decompose the signals in sub components, analyze the different dynamical mode and map them on a differential equation of oscillators, and then have better prediction, but also in bonus, we have also access to the connectivity of those excitatory and inhibitory cell assemblies. So we can even go beyond just better prediction, we have also better interpretability, which is key from a clinical standpoint. The fifth challenge, because I talk a lot about technology, is to go from machine learning to student learning. And it's not just about technicality, it's also about bioethics and created a collaborative environment for the students in clinical tracks to get more technical and ethics literacy. And on the other side, people from artificial intelligence and computational modeling to get also a more sense of what clinical issues are. And so for that, we have created one of the first computational medicine course in the world, the first in French, I think, at the University of Montreal. And in conclusion, beyond those different challenges to get to the point of interpersonalized psychiatry, so I mentioned the three types of computational psychiatry, there is also other challenges that remain. So training the new generation researcher, I think one of the most interesting and the most challenging and the most timely as well. The legal case, so creating sandbox and make interoperable the different data across hospital is also a big challenge. The clinical transferability and the acceptability by the clinicians and the practitioner is also quite challenging. And also the retention of talent in academic research, because there is a big imbalance between salaries and means of research, and even beyond academic research, like in the public domain for mental health in general. So, and the final thing is computing power and infrastructure, because all those computational approach rely on extensive and computationally intensive methodology and techniques. And so now we can see that having access to a lot of computing and having the proper infrastructure for doing that is also a very big challenge. And compared to what is already available in the private sector, hospitals and public stakeholders need to align their infrastructure with the challenges at play for this future computational psychiatry. So thank you very much. You can find my contacts at the bottom of these slides. Feel free to contact me or check our paper either on my website or on the website of the lab. Thank you so much.